In the 5-hour drive, I came up with a name. There was actually a grocery store chain in North Carolina called Clover, and I loved the way that name looked. So that was the name. I decided I'd go back to the men's garment industry, and I had some girlfriends whose dads sold fabric in the Philadelphia area. So I ended up making some contacts, and in a really short amount of time, in about 2 months, I was at market here in Atlanta with my first collection of French laundry bedding. And from that first group, when I went to market, people loved the fact that it was something different, it was something new. It wasn't fabrics that they'd ever seen. I was buying corduroys and tartans and tweeds and plaids and mixing those all together and created some really great bedding. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm selling here in Atlanta, in High Point, New York, Dallas, Seattle, Denver. We're in showrooms, or we have showrooms everywhere. Well, I had the opportunity to work with a showroom designer who decorated several of the La-Z-Boy Company showrooms. And we'd done several bedding ensembles for their Lee showroom, which is predominantly children's bedding. And she came down to market and she said, Debbie, the management at Lee would like to launch a children's line of bedding. Now, we can't pay your price points. You know, we can't have a duvet for a little boy that costs $500. Can you produce offshore? And I said, I've never done anything offshore, but I'll see. She said, well, come up with some ideas and present them, and let's see where it goes. So I drove up to North Carolina and actually met with them. They loved what I was doing. They said, Debbie, you've got 2 weeks to find somebody to make this for you offshore. Well, I contacted everybody I knew in the fabric industry, and I hooked up with a company over in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And 10 months later, as you see on the screen, I was in China actually looking at my first set of production samples of that bedding that would later then sell for 5 years. So that project led to me continuing to do design work for all the different La-Z-Boy companies, Kincaid, American Drew, Pennsylvania House. And then I had the opportunity, the guys that had bought my company said, Debbie, we'll buy your company, and we're going to let you just do design work for us. Now, if you've run your own business, you know how challenging it is to make payroll, to make sure the bills get paid. You've got such a responsibility. So it was very enticing to get rid of that burden and just be able to do design work. So the kids and I moved from College Park here in Atlanta, relocated up to North Carolina, where all my mom's family's actually from. And I thought, this is going to be perfect. I can do design work. The kids were busy with their activities. I'll have more free time. Well, about 2 months later, I'm on a conference call. And the gentleman who had bought my company informed me that they could no longer pay my salary. I could do all the design work for them, and they'd pay me on a design basis. I'd never been one to read directions, and I never thought a contract was important until that moment. I'd always been the one that thought if somebody said they were going to do something, then they would do that. So I found myself in High Point, North Carolina, 2 children in private school, and no job. So quickly thought, okay, what in the world am I going to do? Well, as we all do in times like that, you start networking with all your friends. And my dear friend Margot, who I'd worked for, she said, you know, Debbie, Sid, remember Sid from Atlanta? I said, oh, yeah, I remember him. He's gotten a deal to do furniture for Vera Bradley. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. He'd been doing pottery. How's he doing that? She said, well, you know Sid. So I made a phone call, and about a month later, I was managing production in a furniture factory. Now, the funny thing about that one, in the 200 years that my mom's family had lived in that area, we never had a person in our family work in the upholstery industry. So I knew nothing about furniture. But walked into this factory, there were 6 part-time employees, and what I quickly figured out is there was a pool of talent in this area that was amazing. So what I did is I'd done when I had my other businesses, I surrounded myself with people that knew how to make furniture. So we took that little tiny part-time factory to a company 2 years later that employed over 20 people, made a full line of furniture for Vera Bradley, started doing outsourcing furniture for Edward Farrell Lewis Mittman, which is a very high-end contract company, and it had become quite successful. But the secret for me on that was surrounding myself with people who knew more than I did about how to make furniture. Now, again, not one to be too satisfied. Once that kind of all got up and going, it was going to be time for another project. So I was at the pool one day with my daughter and talking to a mom, and she had a child about Taylor's age, and we were visiting and just doing the normal, how are you? Where are you from? What does your husband do? And she said her husband had a textile mill over in the western part of the state. And I said, well, that's really funny, India. I had this great idea for a fabric years ago, And I tried to find somebody in India or Pakistan or China, but I could never get it figured out. And I said, I'd like to talk to him. Well, after a meeting with her husband, he then connected me with a couple of textile engineers who helped me engineer the fabric. And we actually took what was considered to be the old feed sack fabric, and we figured out how you could make that and weave it wider. And a few months later, 6 months later, we were bringing out the first pieces of that cloth that we were selling. So I was going to Fabric Market in High Point, and we were selling versions of the fabric you see up here. And all of a sudden, we weren't getting calls just for the thousands of yards we were selling. People wanted to know where the pillows were coming from that I was using to stage my space. I had my little upholstery company that was managing production. They were making furniture for me out of my fabrics. They were also making the pillows, and we were getting calls for those. And I realized there's probably a business here. So after, having a business doing bedding once before, I realized this might not be so hard. So I came to market again for the first time here in Atlanta, and we brought out a very basic line of bedding and some furniture and accessories and pillows, and it was a huge success. So I operated my first year, and any of you who have a business know you have to do something until it hurts, which I was hurting that first year. We were getting lots of orders. I had 2 sewers, a part-time cutter, and myself, and that was it. Now, there were days when I was at work at 2:30 or 3 in the morning because we needed to get stuff cut and sold and shipped. So I went to market in January, a year and a half ago, and I came back and was overwhelmed. And I've got a wonderful friend who's here, Candy Lansford, up in the front. And she felt sorry for me because I have a great group of horse girlfriends that we ride together. And I wasn't riding. I said, I am so overwhelmed. What am I going to do? And she said, Debbie, I helped Larry, her husband, with his company, and I know a little bit about QuickBooks. I'll help you. Well, she said, I can only do this for a couple of weeks. Well, a year and a half later, Candy is still there, okay? So what happened in that next year and a half is we went from that small company of myself, 2 sewers, and a part-time cutter. We now have 18 employees at my workroom and office, and we have another 18 to 20 people, depending on how busy we are, over at our furniture factory. So from one really tiny idea of reproducing a vintage fabric, we have put that many people back to work, and that doesn't count, as Phyllis mentioned, the number of people that are at the weaving mills that now we've had to go to a secondary mill, which is down in South Carolina. How many people have gone back to work by one person having what would have seemed to be a very simple idea of just reproducing a fabric. Now, we've had some pictures up on the screen, as y'all have listened to me talk, showing some of our product. And one of the neat things we've done with French Laundry, it's become a complete lifestyle. And how many of y'all have had a chance to go over to the boutique and do any shopping? I think a fair amount. There's some great vendors over there, but we've got a space set up that will give you just a little bit of a taste of what we actually do. We do have a bed over there. We brought a little bit of our furniture, and we actually do a full line of upholstery, sectionals, chaises, dining chairs. In fact, there's a dining chair idea that is now in the Horchow catalog that my daughter came up with the idea as a 7-year-old. So I'm always interested in other people helping me with ideas. About a year ago, we came out with a lighter weight version of our fabric called Brussels. I had people requesting, they said, this is great, but the heavier stuff is too rough to use for tabletop. So we have a lighter weight version that has a little bit more cotton. It comes in wonderful stripe patterns, and that's called Brussels, that we use for napkins and placemats and cocktail napkins and table runners. Now, one of the interesting things, which Phyllis alluded, this started out as a fabric idea. Probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I was either at Lakewood or Scott, because those are my 2 favorite places, like as Phyllis, second weekend of the month to go shop. Came across an old feed bag, and I brought several of these that we'll have in our space to show you guys. And these old feed bags were starting to show up, and people were using those to upholster furniture. Now, the challenge with that, this stuff is only 22 to 24 inches wide. So if you're going to do a big sofa, you're going to have to sew several pieces together. So I had the brilliant idea, if we could figure out how to do a version of that fabric, but could make it wider, 54 inches wide, that we would have a product that would really sell. And as you see, that's exactly what's happened. Now, it's a cool history, and you see so many of the colors of the different fabrics and the stripes that you see. What people would do, this was yardage that women were weaving on small hand looms. How many of y'all have ever seen a hand loom? Okay, it takes a long time to make some yardage. And people were weaving these, and this is what you would make grain bags to take your feed to market in. Now, the reason you see so many different colors, if Jones, we might have 2 big red stripes and a thin red in the center. Lansford might have 3 black stripes. Hoffman could have 2 gray stripes. That way you'd make sure you always got your grain bags back. Now, over the course of 100 years, because a lot of this fabric is actually over 100 years old, as they were washed, they became the colors were softer, the hand and the texture got softer, and then you started seeing people use these on furniture and purses and pillows. So it was a really neat history, I think, about how the fabric got started, and it's ageless. Now, what we've done with it, that one fabric, is make a whole lifestyle. I think the neat thing about French laundry, it can go into any setting. You can see it very transitional. It can be in a loft in the city. You can use it at a farmhouse. There's some gorgeous shots in the last magazine showing how we've done tabletop and stockings. We've got a few of our stockings here just to show you all the different things that you can do with the fabric and how nice it mixes and matches. Now, one thing that people, and again, I love to talk to other designers, and people always ask me, how do you come up with all these ideas? I'm never at a loss for ideas at all. So what I, like to do, and I think a lot of us that do design, you have to get out of the setting that you're normally in. And I love to travel. I know Phyllis has talked about her trip just up to the Amish country. And it's nice to get out. And the kids and I love to go down to Kiowa, down to South Carolina, and just be able to get out, and it kind of gives you a fresh perspective on things. I also love looking at fashion magazines. I'll see an outfit on somebody, and I turn that into a bed ensemble. When I see a great outfit, I see a duvet cover, a dust skirt, and pillow shams, which is really fun. And my daughter and I, every couple of months, we'll go to Barnes & Noble. We come back with a stack of magazines. We sit in bed, and we pull out ideas. And like I said, she came up with an idea for a dining chair that Horchow bought, and they've been running it for over a year. So I think that's really fun.